I never considered myself the suspicious type. After 20 years of marriage, trust had become as ordinary as breathing. Miles and I had built a life together, mortgage payments, family vacations, late-night conversations, and all the little routines that quietly stitched two people together over time. That was why the message shattered me so completely. It happened shortly before 2 in the morning. Sleep refused to come. An uneasy feeling sat heavily in my chest, though I couldn't explain why. Miles slept beside me, peaceful and unaware, while I stared into the darkness. Then his phone vibrated on the nightstand. The glow from the screen caught my attention. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I wasn't searching for evidence of anything. But before I could look away, the message appeared. My tiger, those 2 nights were unforgettable. I miss you already. The words seemed to freeze the air around me. 2 nights? Miles had spent the week in Houston attending a business conference. At least that was what he'd told me. My stomach twisted violently. I slipped out of bed and hurried into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. Cold water splashed across my face. But nothing could erase the message burned into my mind. 20 years. That was the first thought that came to me. 20 years of loyalty. 20 years of shared memories. 20 years of believing I knew the man sleeping in the next room. When morning arrived, everything looked normal. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. The coffee machine hummed. Miles read emails while eating toast. The ordinary nature of the moment felt cruel. "You look tired," he said casually. "I had a strange dream," I replied. He glanced up. "What kind of dream?" I forced a smile. The kind where everything you believe turns out to be a lie. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. Then it vanished. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and left for work. The moment the door closed, I picked up my phone and called Tamsin. She had been my best friend since college. She knew every chapter of my life. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening, it was her. We met at our usual cafe 30 minutes later. The smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the room, but even familiar comforts felt distant. When I showed her the message, her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't immediately condemn Miles. Instead, she looked nervous, almost frightened. "Maybe there's another explanation," she said quietly. The comment hit me like a slap. Another explanation? What explanation existed for a text like that? As I stared at her, a strange feeling settled over me. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but her discomfort felt personal. The conversation ended badly. I told her I was leaving Miles and taking the children to stay with my parents for a while. She seemed strangely anxious about that decision. The look on her face followed me all the way home. Later that evening, I returned to the house to grab a forgotten backpack belonging to my daughter. The driveway was empty. Miles wasn't supposed to be home yet. I hurried inside, wanting to avoid any confrontation. Then I heard the front door unlock. Panic surged through me. I moved toward the kitchen, intending to leave through the back entrance. That's when I heard voices. A man's voice, Miles, and a woman's voice. The moment she spoke, every muscle in my body locked. I knew that voice. I had known it for more than 2 decades. Tamsin, my best friend, the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, the woman I trusted with my secrets, the woman I considered family. I stood frozen as they entered the house together. Then I heard Miles laugh. "Don't worry," he said. "She doesn't suspect anything." The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. The 2 people I loved most in the world were walking upstairs toward my bedroom. And suddenly, every strange glance, every uncomfortable hesitation, every unexplained feeling from the cafe made perfect sense. The betrayal wasn't coming from one person. It was coming from both of them. Together, I followed them upstairs without fully understanding what I was doing. My legs felt weak. My hands trembled. Every step seemed unreal, like I was trapped inside someone else's nightmare. The bedroom door stood slightly open. Laughter drifted into the hallway. For a moment, I considered turning around, leaving. pretending I hadn't seen or heard anything. But another part of me needed the truth. I pushed open the door. The room fell silent. Miles stood beside the bed. Tamsin was only a few feet away. The expressions on their faces told me everything. Shock, fear, guilt. No explanation was necessary. "No," I said before either of them could speak. "Don't insult me by pretending this isn't exactly what it looks like." Tamsin's eyes filled with tears. Miles stepped forward. "Celeste, stop." My voice sounded calm, which surprised even me. Inside, I was breaking apart, but outwardly, I felt cold, almost detached, like I was observing the destruction from a distance. For 20 years, I had loved Miles. For 20 years, I had trusted Tamsin. And now both of them stood before me as strangers. I packed a suitcase that night. Miles followed me through the house, pleading for a chance to explain. I refused. There are moments when explanations lose all value. This was one of them. By midnight, I was driving toward my parents' home in the mountains. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. I barely noticed the passing miles. Eventually, a fuel warning light flashed on my dashboard. Reluctantly, I pulled into a small gas station. The place looked deserted. A man behind the counter noticed my red eyes immediately. "Rough night?" he asked. I attempted a smile. It failed. A few minutes later, he handed me a cup of coffee and invited me to sit down. Normally, I would have declined. That night, I didn't have the strength. His name was Jude. Something about his calm presence made it easier to talk. Not because he offered solutions. Not because he tried to fix anything. Because he listened. Really listened. I told him everything. The message. The affair. The betrayal. The collapse of my marriage. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he said something I never forgot. "Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people closest to us." There was no judgment in his voice, only understanding. Later, he shared a little of his own story losing his wife years earlier and learning how grief changes people. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt something other than anger. I felt seen. The conversation lasted less than an hour, yet somehow it helped more than anything else had. Before I left, we exchanged phone numbers, not as a promise, just as a possibility. When I finally reached my parents' house, dawn was beginning to break. My mother opened the door and immediately understood something was wrong. She didn't ask questions. She simply hugged me. For a while, life became a blur of difficult conversations and painful decisions. My son returned from college. My daughter struggled to understand why our family was changing. Divorce papers were filed. Lawyers became involved. Months later, Miles and I sat across from each other in a courtroom. He looked older, tired, defeated. When the judge began discussing the division of property, Miles surprised everyone. He voluntarily surrendered nearly everything. The house, the savings, the investments. He wanted the children protected. Part of me expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. When the proceedings ended, I walked outside and took a deep breath. The marriage was over. 20 years had ended with a judge's signature. Yet as strange as it sounds, that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was accepting that the future I had imagined no longer existed. I wasn't grieving a husband. I was grieving a life. And grief, I discovered, doesn't disappear overnight. It arrives in waves. But eventually, those waves begin to weaken, and somewhere beyond them, a new shore appears. Several months after the divorce, I moved into a townhouse with my children. It wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. But it was ours. For the first time in a long while, I felt something resembling peace. Then one evening, while unpacking old boxes, I discovered a bundle of letters. The handwriting belonged to Tamsin. The letters were addressed to Miles. Curiosity turned to shock as I began reading. These weren't recent messages. They were decades old. Love letters. Letters written years before I had ever met either of them. The deeper I dug, the stranger the story became. Eventually, I uncovered the truth. As teenagers, Miles and Tamsin had been deeply in love. When Miles moved away, both continued writing to each other. but neither ever received the other's letters. A family member had secretly intercepted them. Each believed the other had stopped caring. Each spent years carrying the pain of abandonment. The discovery didn't excuse what they had done. Nothing could. But it explained something important. Their affair hadn't begun with passion. It had begun with unfinished history, with old wounds, with decades of unanswered questions. When I shared the truth with Miles, he thanked me quietly. Nothing more. By then, there was nothing left to repair between us. Soon afterward, Tamsin came to see me. She looked exhausted, older, not physically but emotionally. The weight of regret seemed to hang from her shoulders. For the first time, she told me everything. She admitted she had loved Miles long before I entered the picture. She admitted that becoming my friend had initially been influenced by those feelings. Yet somewhere along the way, she had genuinely come to care about me. Her confession didn't erase the betrayal, but it revealed how complicated human hearts can become. Before leaving, she told me she was moving across the country to start over. I wished her well, not because I had forgiven everything, but because carrying resentment forever felt like another prison. As the seasons changed, so did my life. My daughter painted bright murals across her bedroom wall. My son brought home a young woman he cared about deeply. My parents began rediscovering parts of themselves they had ignored for years. Even my mother, who once believed endurance was the answer to every problem, admitted she had been wrong. Then there was Jude. Our friendship grew slowly. No dramatic romance, no grand declarations. Just two people learning to trust again. We shared dinners, long conversations, quiet evenings. What surprised me most was how safe it felt. There were no games, no uncertainty, no need to perform. One evening we sat on my porch watching the sunset. Jude asked what I would tell the version of myself who existed before everything fell apart. I thought carefully before answering. I'd tell her that losing something isn't always the end of the story. He smiled. And what else? I looked toward the fading horizon. I'd tell her she's stronger than she realizes. Years earlier, I believed happiness meant preserving what I already had. Now I understood something different. Sometimes life breaks apart because it can no longer contain the person you're becoming. The betrayal had wounded me. The divorce had changed me. The grief had tested me. But none of those things had destroyed me. Instead, they forced me to rebuild. Piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. One afternoon, I stopped at the same gas station where I had first met Jude. The place looked exactly the same. The coffee wasn't any better. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. Yet everything felt different. Because I was different. Jude walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Still writing your story?" he asked. I smiled. Every day. And for the first time in years, I truly believed the best chapters hadn't happened yet. They were still waiting ahead.